Sorry. Thank you all for coming. We're getting started a little late, but that shouldn't affect us too much. We're really winding down. We're getting to the end of the 7th chapter. Just in case somebody's mic is, I think, is still on, so just check that. Unless you'd like to be on. Before I start, let me just, here's our link that's in the chat now, as we do every week. So again, if you'd like to catch up on anything or revisit something, that should all be there. I believe we actually have all the classes up and running now. So again, if you've been waiting for something, so it should all be there. I think we're up to 42 classes so far. This would be the 43rd, which is quite something, and really something to be proud of. So again, we're winding down to the end of the 7th chapter. And in doing so, we are at verse number 26. Let's jump into the screen share. Maybe I'll take a look together. All right, there's the screen share there. Now you notice I don't know if you can see it, but it's a little smaller than I usually have. The reason is because this is a very long verse. So I couldn't fit it all on the page if I raised the size any bigger. So this is as big as it's going to get in case you want to see all this entire verse together. Now, if you remember last week, verse 25, he said, okay, so I've laid out this reality in front of us. The fact of the matter is, you're not going to have one completely competent, unquestionable source of wisdom in the world. It doesn't exist. All right? There's no such thing. So that's the case. Okay, fine. So then wisdom has to be something that I define myself. It comes from within me. I have to decide what I consider to be wisdom and what I consider to not be wisdom. Whatever I decide to throw out or keep in, that's what I'm going to have to do. And in doing that, he revisits this idea that when I want to see something, I want to see both the good and the bad. I want to see the positive and the negative. I want to look at both sides of something and figure out if there's anything that I'm missing in either side. That's what he said in verse 25. He says, I'm going to look at wisdom and calculation and try to get into that and understand that. At the same time, I'm also going to look at, he said, 4 things: wickedness, foolishness, stupidity, and craziness. Which we said were kind of like 4 different approaches to 4 different types of the anti-wisdom. Okay, so that's what he did last week. Again, that was verse number 25. He said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure out, I have to decide for myself. I have to look into my own life, backwards and forwards, and kind of decide, what do I consider to be wisdom? What do I consider to be, the things that are going to guide my life? Okay. And he starts with the fascinating thing, how he decides to start. And it may seem like this is after the introduction. I think this is really just the end of the intro. Okay. Verse number 26 and 27 and 28 is going to be the end of this intro. So this whole chapter, this very, very long chapter, has all been an intro into the second half of the book. If you remember, we divided the book into 2 parts. The book of Kohelet, it went from chapter 1 to chapter 6, and then there was a significant break. Again, if you look at the actual written out version of the Kohelet, you will find that there's a break in the text there, and then it picks up from chapter 7. This entire chapter has been an intro to the second half of the book, where he's going to be discussing wisdom. So first half was happiness, second half is going to be wisdom. That seems to be what his breakup is. We originally said kind of a different take on it. I think I'm reevaluating that. Or I think it's really he's looking. It's man's search for wisdom, as opposed to man's search for meaning. So it's man's search for wisdom, and so that's what he's going to be doing over here. And before anything, he wants to say this piece. Now this is a potentially controversial verse over here, and I think that there's a obvious message and a hidden message, but the hidden message is pretty obvious too. So there's the simple understanding of the words and the way that I think what he's intending to do. So let's take a look at it. Again, you notice it's a very long verse over. It says, Motza ani, and I find, mar mimavis, more bitter than death. Et ha'isha, the woman, I find the woman, to be more bitter than death. Okay, that's the controversy right there. That's what he seems to pipe up with right at the beginning. Now he's going to qualify that for a second. It's not just all women are more bitter than death. So let's keep reading before we decide what he means to be saying. Ashrehi mitzodim, for she is a trap. Okay, v'charamim liba, and her heart is a snare. Asurim yadeha, her hands bind. Tov lifneha Elokim, the one who is good before God, yimalet mimena, will run away from her, will avoid her at all costs. The chotei yilached ba, and the sinner will get ensnared by her. Okay, again, that's a long verse. So let's take it from the top again. And it says, Umotze ani marmi bavet, and I find more bitter than death. Eta isha is the woman. Asher hi mitzodim, that she is a trap. V'charamim liba, her heart ensnares, or is a snare. Asurim yadaha, and her hands bind. Tov lifneha Elokim, the one who is good before God, Yimalet mimena, will avoid her. The chotei yilached ba, and the sinner will get trapped by her, will get ensnared by her. Okay, so there's a lot of things just right off the bat over here. Okay, let's take kind of the bigger picture question first, which is that King Solomon wrote, according to our tradition, King Solomon wrote 3 books. All right, here we have over here Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes. We've got Shir HaShirim, which is the Song of Songs, and we've got Mishlei, Proverbs. So those are his 3 books. Now here he says that I find more bitter than death is the woman. Okay, and then in the book of Proverbs he says quite the opposite. He says Matzah Isha Matzah Tov, that if somebody finds a woman, if a man finds a woman, he has found goodness. So that's kind of the bigger picture question. You know, how is it that he says in one place? I mean, if he just said over here that women are terrible, okay, you know, I wouldn't agree, but at least he would be consistent. The problem is that there's an inconsistency. He himself and Torah in general would disagree with that sentiment that women are terrible. I want to make that very clear. That is not a Torah idea. The Jewish people do not believe that women are terrible, in no way, shape, or form. So we're obviously going to have to qualify this point over here. Just as a side point, kind of a fun idea is that kind of whatever, it's a conversation piece, I would say, is that the Talmud tells us that in Babylon, which is where the Talmud was written, they would ask somebody who just got married, they'd ask him afterwards, did you motzeh or matzah? Did you get this verse over here that says motzani ani marmi mavasat isha, that I have found that women are more bitter than death? Or did you get the other verse, matzah isha matzah tov, that if somebody finds a woman, they find good, right? So that's motzeh here and matzah over there. This is present tense and that's past tense. But it's just kind of a funny thing that they would ask that to freshly married men, you know, which category are you in? Strange thing to ask, and obviously there's a lot of, you have to understand that there's probably some allegory there, and some lesson that the Talmud is trying to tell us, which we can possibly discuss, just not right here. But suffice it to say that you see already that King Solomon himself is playing 2 sides of the same game. In Kohelet and Ecclesiastes, he says, worse than death, you know, more bitter than death. And in Proverbs, he says that it's the best thing ever. And the Song of Songs would definitely indicate the same idea, that to be in love and to have somebody that you care for is definitely something very special and not more bitter than death. So there seems to be this inconsistency. If we were just to read the verse on its plain meaning, then we'd have an issue with what he means over here. The other piece is that he likely does not mean this. For somebody who married 1,000 women altogether, it's kind of be strange for him to say that it's worse than death. Maybe 1,000 is. I don't know. Maybe being married to any 1,000 people, man or woman, would be that terrible. I don't know. But he doesn't say that. You know, that obviously that's kind of just joking around. But I think what he's talking about over here, again, the surface version of what he's talking about over here, is a person whose wife, a man whose wife is not faithful to them. Okay. And again, this is King Solomon writes the book from a man's perspective, so that's really the focus is going to come from a man's perspective. I think the same thing would be true the other way. If it would be from a feminine perspective, it would be the opposite. It would be you know, it would be the man would be, if somebody is unfaithful, that is more bitter than death. And the idea would be pretty straightforward, that when you have that relationship with somebody, Isha, right? Specifically, Isha is kind of the term we use when we're referring to somebody who you have a relationship, a woman that a man has a relationship with. So that person, if that's should pretend, you would hope, would be the home base for the person. It's where they come home to every day. It's the place where they place their trust, they place their faith, they look to for advice. It's their home. And if that person is not faithful to them, so that's more than just not having a home, not having a place of trust and safety and love and advice and anything like that. It's worse, because there's this break with what's supposed to be. So that's more shattering, more bitter than death. You know, worse is to have this thing that's supposed to be good, but really is not. It's supposed to be this special place, and that's not. And that's why I think he seems to be saying, and that's exactly how he puts it. Is he says we're talking about a woman who is mitzodim. She is a trap. She ensnares people. Her hands bind. She ties them up, right? She gets you locked in her, and then she's not acting appropriately in that way, in that relationship. She's not contributing to the relationship in the right way. Again, this is all coming from King Solomon's male perspective. I assume, I can't say for sure, but I would assume that he would say the opposite if we came from a woman's perspective, it would be the opposite. I don't think it's not a misogynistic statement. That's not what he's trying to do here. Rather, what he seems to be doing is saying that the place where you placed, or the thing that you placed all your trust in, for that to go and rebel, that's more bitter than death. That's more life-shattering and mind-shattering and earth-shattering than anything else. Okay? And he lists three actions that are taken. All right? Number one is mitzodim. And I was thinking a lot about this today. We have these three different verbs over here. There's tzad, okay, for the Hebrew, that's tzad, means to trap. Haram, which is interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. And asur, which means to bind. So for those of you who are doing Daf Yomi right now, asur is a very common word. A person takes on an oath and says, I am asur. I'm not going to allow myself to, eat grapes, to anything. You can make anything asur to yourself. You shouldn't, if you're smart. We talked about that a long time ago. But you could potentially do that. Asur means you're forbidden to something. So, in fact, that's the term we use to this very day commonly. We would say that such and such an action is asur, is not allowed. You're allowed to do that, whether that's halachically or if a person, again, would take that upon themselves not to do something. So, three different terms. Let's just discuss this word haram first, because I think it's interesting. It took me a while to pinpoint exactly what the difference is between a mitzudah, which is a trap, and a haram, which is a trap. In fact, they're often interchangeable. At times in the Talmud, they would have fish nets, and the fish net was either called mitzudat dagim, a fish trap, or chermat yam, a ocean trap. So I was trying to figure out what exactly the difference is between these two phrases. And if you look at it, I looked it up, is that haram has this connotation of destructiveness. Okay, so for example, it's the same word that we would use if we wanted to put somebody in excommunication. Right? We wanted to say that so-and-so, nobody should have any business dealings with this person because they're not acting appropriately. We would put them in cherem. We would, put them in excommunication. So there's a destructive connotation over there. Similarly, or not really similarly, but there's a certain type of sanctification that a person can do. If a person has property and he wants to give it over to the temple, he wants to now belong to the temple coffers, which is a good thing to do, a gift to the temple. So one of the ways a person can do that is through a process again called cherem. They can say this item is now cherem to Hashem. The idea again being that it kind of this land would lose its identity. It's no longer my land. It's no longer a field. It's temple property, right? It loses its identity. So there's a destructive connotation over there. So you say that this woman, whatever this woman is, right, which I believe is an idea, not a person. This woman she is a trap. She herself is a trap. Her heart is this other thing, this snare. It's more like a bear trap or something like that. It destroys as it traps, okay? As opposed to just a simple trap, which you put out a trap in the forest and you hope something walks into the trap or something like that. This is more like, I think, more like a bear trap. It attacks as it traps something in. So her heart ensnares like that. And the final thing is asurim yadeha, her hands tie, they bind, okay? And so these are three different actions that this woman is doing, okay? Again, likely not a literal woman, okay? So in that sense, so we have three actions, three items also. There's the woman, her heart, and her hands. And now we have to understand what exactly the verse is really talking about. Because again, King Solomon himself tells us that we're likely not talking about a woman. All right, so what are we talking about? Plus, context. There's no discussion of women over here. This is not what we've been talking about. Why would this show up suddenly? So we have to figure out what it is talking about. And it's basically across the board amongst all the commentaries, in the Talmud itself, all over the board, that this verse is talking about something called minut. Okay? Minut is, that's the Hebrew word, minut, not an English word or not minute. Minut, a min. A min is somebody, it's a certain type of philosophy that takes a person astray, takes a person away from what they're supposed to be doing. And in the Torah's idea, it's philosophy that takes a person away from God, okay? But it's really any sort of philosophy that takes a person away from the real goal that they want to get to. In some sense, in one sense, it could be a philosophy that takes a person away from being able to interact with other people. Or again, the more simple cases where it's a philosophy that takes a person away from Torah, that takes a person away from God. In the early days of Christianity was referred to as minut. It was referred to as a Christian was referred to as a min. Okay, that was while they were still kind of a subsect of Judaism before they broke off and became a separate religion. So we referred to them as these incorrect philosophers because they were taking Torah concepts and twisting them. So when we think of minut, we can think of wisdom, but it's wisdom that's taking you in the wrong direction. Meaning, King Solomon is saying, I'm on the road, I'm on the path looking for wisdom, but there are certain types of wisdoms that are not going to take you, there's certain types of inquiry that it's not going to take you closer to wisdom. It's going to take you farther away. And the problem is that it's very tempting to go those paths, and to go down that path for whatever reason. Again, from a spiritual perspective, a person would want to stay, we have a desire to fulfill our desires. We want to fulfill our needs and our desires. So if you have a philosophy that tempts a person away from that, then that's very tempting. That's very exciting. You could easily be fooled into thinking that it's wisdom that's taking me that direction, as opposed to what really is, which is this incorrect philosophy. So when comparing this minut, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, the English word for it. Heresy is what it's commonly translated as. So let's use that word. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's the closest I'm going to get off the top of my head right now. So when you talk about heresy, you talk about somebody who's following a philosophy that takes them away from working with other people, from their goals in life, and is instead sending them on the path towards their temptations. So there's really three problems that you have over here that this faces, that this presents. Number one is it is tzad, all right? It traps a person. And to discuss that word for a second, I should have discussed that first also. Tzad means, literally the word tzad means it's a side, right? When a person is, if you have a side of something, or if you are pulled to the side of something, that's what the idea of tzad is. So when we translate that into trapping, trapping means to sanction off, to make something uniquely set aside for one purpose. So this heresy, what it has a tendency to do is it starts to pull a person to the side. It starts to take them away from where other people are going, or it takes the person away from where wisdom should really take them, or it causes the person to dedicate themselves to this other lifestyle. And they say, it's a reality that when a person starts thinking in certain ways, it starts following certain philosophies, it starts to identify the person, starts to become what that person's all about. And it starts to cause a dedication. The person dedicates themselves to this way of thinking, which leads to step number two, which is a loss of identity. Haram, again, that haram means that it causes the person to lose their identity. So in one sense, it just pulls the person aside. It says, dedicate yourself to me. Then step two is that it says, lose yourself to me. Lose yourself to this belief, to this way of thinking. And the final step is that it cuts the person off entirely. It's asur, and makes it impossible. It ties the person down and doesn't allow them to even reach for help. Okay, if a person is following a way of thinking that does not allow them to work with other people, so now they've locked themselves in a corner. They've cornered themselves and said, I'm so far dug in to my beliefs that I can't even reach out for help anymore. And we could imagine this from a perspective of a person is going through a sin. I hate that we use the word sin because it's got so many other Catholic connotations. But if a person finds themselves mired in actions that they don't want to do, and they don't, not just that they're actions that, not that they don't want to do because they're doing them, but actions that they feel are reprehensible, but they don't just stop there. They make a belief system out of it. They say, you know what, not only do I do this action, and there's a reason why I do this action. I think it's the right thing for me to do. And then it becomes an identity. And they say, I'm a so-and-so person. I do such and such an action. That's just who I am. And then even though their insides are crawling or crying out for help and hoping for something else, it cuts them off from people. It says that there's an inability to reach out to other people. I actually just yesterday, I went to Seattle for the weekend, and I was driving back on the I-5, and there was a billboard, and it said that 90% of addicts do not reach out for help because of shame. And it was trying to get people to stop shaming people for their issues, and instead to support them and say, here, I'm here for you. And that was a fascinating statistic. I mean, 90% of addicts, that's quite a number. But that's exactly what it is. When something becomes your identity, or becomes something that's so ingrained in who you are that it's now an opinion, it's now a belief, it's now a religion to the person, it makes it impossible for the person to reach out, and ties their hands, or actually not ties their hands, her hands tie. Her, whoever this her is, maybe it's heresy, maybe it's addiction, maybe it's sin. Heresy is just kind of the basic idea. Once it becomes a belief system, and you live this way, and you identify this way, and it ties you up and makes it impossible to reach out for any help. And that's a very dangerous predicament for a person to be in, because they're not just going through something. They can't do anything about it. They're the way that they would usually go about getting out of it is locked away from them, is gone from them. So what does he tell us? He tells us better, what's good, right? That's always a word we look for in Kohelet. What's good? Good is somebody who's good before God would avoid this entirely. Avoid step one. Don't get stuck in the first place. Okay? And the sinner, which sin, whatever you want to call it, sin. So the person who's stuck in it is not just stuck, is trapped in it. This is another word for trap, by the way. Yilached, right, means to be entrapped. How's it different from the other ones? I'm not 100% sure. I didn't think that far ahead. Think that far into it. But yilached, lachad means to be entrapped by it. So, but someone who's in a good place will avoid it entirely, and other people will get trapped in it. Right? Unfortunately, he doesn't give us a halfway point. He doesn't say what to do when you're in it, when you're still in step one or step two, or even if step three. Right? We are Jewish people. We believe in the ability for redemption, for a person to redeem themselves and to become better. So he doesn't say anything about that. I don't have an answer for why he doesn't, but he does. That's what he says. He says, step one, run for your life. Stay away from this. If something is calling to you in that way, you want to run for it entirely. You want to stay far, far away from such a thing. Again, be that addiction, be that some negative thoughts or depressive thoughts or anything like that. You want to stay away from those things entirely, because it's very easy to, somebody who stumbles into it will get trapped. We won't just make a mistake. It's not just a one-off. It's very easy to get ensnared and trapped into this thing. So it's interesting because, again, he calls this all the woman. He says it, he gives this mashal, he gives this parable, this analogy to a woman, to a person who the husband gives his full trust into something. Wisdom is something that I should be able to rely on. I have wisdom, or I search for wisdom. It's something that I should be able to rely on, but then it's rebelling against me. There's a philosophy that's taking me elsewhere, and that's where he says that's the most dangerous or scary thing, is for that thing that we always place our trust in to suddenly rebel. Okay, so he says, so this is kind of a word to the wise in our search for wisdom. He says, I'm looking at all the different types of wisdom. I'm looking at the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things in the middle, and I see that there's lots of things that we call wisdom, lots of philosophies that are, they're all in the category of wisdom. But you know what there also is? There's this minut, there's this heresy that shows up also. There are philosophies that are just bad. They're going to take you down a bad road, and that's not a way to live either. So you want to be careful of that. If you want to be good before God, okay, whatever that means. If you want to be good before God, run away, right? Run for your life. Literally, malat means to run for your life. Where's the case where we find that? That's what it says when Lot was, after while the cities of Sodom were being destroyed, Lot and his daughters, they were nimlat, they ran away to the hills. So it's running for your life. That's really the connotation that we're giving over there. It's not simply ruts, which would mean to run. It's simalet, it means to run for your life. It's a very specific type of running. Okay, so this is what he says. That, and again, this is the point of this verse is not a misogynistic idea. What he is saying is that there are types of philosophy that they are very dangerous for you, and you want to stay far away from them. Okay, you want to run for your life when you're facing them. Okay, so and there's three issues that we're afraid of. Number one is that it's going to ask you to dedicate yourself. It's going to ask you to lose your identity and to take up a new identity. And number three is it's going to cut you off from the ability, from your source, from the very sources of your safety, from your safety net. It's going to cut you off from your safety net. That's what I'm looking for. So that is the fear that he has when facing these types of philosophies. Be very careful when searching out philosophies that you're not running into something that's going to pull you away from other people, from the people that you love. It's not going to cut you off from your relationships. It's not going to ruin, it's not going to change your identity. You want to be careful with the types of wisdom that you engage in, that there's something that allows you that doesn't show these signs, I guess is what we're trying to say. Doesn't show these signs of requiring you to dedicate yourself or lose your identity or cut you off from your safety. All right, so that is that verse. That's verse number 26. And now we come to verse number 27. Much shorter verse. In fact, I'm going to raise the size one bit right over here, make it a little easier. And here we go. Now it's a little shorter. Sorry about that. Here we go. We only got a couple minutes left. So, Re'ezeh matzati. Look at this that I have found, says. Amra Kohelet. Kohelet says, Achat la'achat limso cheshbon. One to one to create a calculation, to find a calculation. Now, that doesn't sound like normal English. We'll discuss in just a second. But again, what's the word of the words mean? Re'ezeh matzati. Look at this that I have found. Amra Kohelet. Kohelet says, Achat la'achat, one to one, limso cheshbon, to find a calculation or to come to a calculation. So there's a number of things that we have to figure out what this verse is saying, first of all. Number one is, what is this phrase? Achat la'achat limso cheshbon. What does it mean? One to create a calculation or to find a calculation. That we have to figure out what that means. But there's another point that's kind of thrown in here, is that I guess 2 points. Number one is that he signs his name. Once again, he actually brings his name. He hasn't done that so much. That kind of showed up at the very beginning of the book. He said who he was. He said, I'm Kohelet. And that was kind of his statement of his qualifications. He was stating why he's qualified to discuss happiness, because he's tried everything. Because he's surrounded by wisdom. If you go way back to the early classes, you'll see that's what we understood Kohelet to be, is that he has what it takes to make this inquiry. But what's interesting is here he uses a feminine term over here. Amra Kohelet. Kohelet says, he doesn't say Amar, which would be the masculine version. He says Amra Kohelet. Kohelet says in the feminine version, which is very strange because he's not a female. He was a male. He was a man. So why would he switch it over here? So I think there's a number of things that we could look into. Let's first take the second half of the second piece over here. That one-to-one to come to a calculation. What he seems to be indicating is that I'm going to throw at you a lot of different thoughts. And they may seem slightly disjointed, but if you follow them and add them all together, you're going to find that there's something special there, that I'm building for you an idea. So the sages take this verse and they say a very interesting lesson for us, for your average person. It says that every time a person puts a penny in the tzedakah box or gives a little bit of money to tzedakah, that's a good thing. Even though it's not much, each individual penny doesn't do much, or quarter. Penny probably isn't worth anything nowadays after inflation, but a quarter in the tzedakah box. So every time you put a quarter in, it's not much money. It's really not. But it's good to train yourself to do that, because over time it adds up to a much larger amount. So in the same way, I think he's presenting wisdom over here. In the following chapters, again, this is the end of the intro. So in the following chapters, he's going to kind of throw rapid fire, lightning round, nuggets of wisdom. Don't discount them as just individual items. There's going to be something he's building to, ideas that he's going to be creating with his thoughts. I think that's really what he's trying to say over here. The same way, and that's the comparison that the sages are making, is that just like a lot of, a bunch of quarters in tzedakah box and in charity will go and come together to a large amount. In the same way over here, these bits of wisdom, they're going to make sense. And So I think that's what he's trying to say over here. But I think he's doing something else with this verse. I think he's hedging a little bit. Because he said there's no ultimate source of wisdom besides for God or objective reasoning or anything. There's no one person who can tell you all the wisdom in the world. So you're going to get my take on it, is what I'm understanding over here. Is what he's saying is, why does he sign his name? Because he wants you to know that everything you see coming here is Kohelet speaking. It's me, myself, King Solomon saying, I'm telling you what I see. This is what I have determined to be wisdom. That's kind of a bit of a take it or leave it idea. Whatever you're getting is Kohelet's wisdom. Now, we know backstory, wisest of all people ever to live. So that's a pretty good indicator. Not only that, Kohelet, part of the name also indicated that he had the ability to gather, because of his wealth and his influence, he had the ability to gather all the wise people into one place, into Jerusalem. Again, that's way back in the first verse. So by gathering everyone into that one city, he's able to bounce his ideas off of other people and not just say them without being checked. There's a peer review process, so to speak. So there's that idea also. But everything he's saying is coming from him. So you don't like it? Don't blame God. Don't blame Torah or anything like that. Blame Kohelet. You don't like it? Blame Kohelet. Now, also keep in mind that wait it out. See how things build up and see if you still have those feelings at the end. But I think that's also why he makes into a feminine version over here. Because again, in throughout history, a feminine way of speaking would be a timid way of speaking, so to speak. It's not the case nowadays, but in general. But to say it as a in the feminine is almost to say I'm timidly presenting myself as Kohelet over here. So this is my ideas. Take your leave it. I really think that what he's doing over here is he's hedging. So he's saying, look at what I found. This is what I, Kohelet, found. You don't like it? Buy a different book. There's other books out there. This is what Kohelet found. And he's saying that with a little bit of humility. He's saying, this is what you're going to get from me. And again, if you don't like what you're hearing, perhaps wait it out, because one thing will build on the next thing and will build on the next thing. And by the end of it, you'll find, just like a charity box full of money, you might find that there's actually some wisdom over there. So that seems to be what he's saying over here. Again, that's verse 26 and 27 this week. Very long verse 26 and a little shorter verse 27. Next week, God willing, we should finish the chapter. There's only 2 verses following, verse 28 and 29. I thought I was actually going to do 28 this week, but we ran out of time. So with that, I'm going to come back over here. Thank you for joining us.